Hey YouTube, it's me, Novarius, and today I'd like to talk to you about skeletons. Specifically, I want to talk about how they function, how to destroy them, and how would they fight. Now, obviously, I'm talking about fantasy skeletons, like in a setting such as one I've been recently playing, Divinity: Original Sin. You have skeleton warriors that you have to fight, and I've been wondering about this for quite a while. Now, let's first theorize a little bit of how would they function. Now, if you don't know, if you just have a skeleton without any flesh, it would just fall apart. There's no tendons keeping everything together, no muscle, nothing. So it would just fall apart. So obviously something magical has to not only resurrect it, but also keep it together. And we we have to take some leaps here. Um, I I don't think that it would be simple to just resurrect a skeleton compared to a zombie, because a skeleton um, doesn't have eyes to see, doesn't have a brain, it doesn't have a mouth, right? So all of these things that you would want it to have, like you in for instance Divinity, they can speak. Of course, they don't have a mouth, they don't have vocal cords, they got nothing of the sort. So they need something magical to do that for them. Now, I'm not 100% certain. You could just say, it's magic, don't worry about it. But I would like to see some more people think about uh, the things like this, and actually like think about how this is done, and is that an interesting topic to continue on with? Because if there are resources required, for instance, maybe you need some sort of magical core, a trinket or a crystal that you like place within their ribcage or their skull or something like that, and that will allow it to be resurrected. Like that is a material, and that is, if that is needed, where does it come from? Like you can make stories with these elements, and that's what I want to focus on. If we think about how they function, we can also think about storylines that are linked to it, and this gives you more detail in your world, and it's not that hard to come up with something. You could just say it's necromancy. Don't worry about that. Um, like in Skyrim, for instance, the Elder Scrolls series, you can just like shoot at a skeleton, it gets resurrected, no problem. But I don't like that. It's very simplified, it's very superficial, and it doesn't feel satisfying to me. Um, what I would what I prefer to see is that you have some sort of core that for some reason binds a skeleton together, and we have to assume that the magic works as thus: whatever the bones, who like all these bones belong to one person, right? Whoever they belong to, like they all link back together as if they were still part of that body, but without the body, right? Just the skeleton. And then, now that we have like kind of thought about how they function, let's think about how to destroy them. Now, as I said before, I played Divinity: Original Sin, and in there is a moment where a character talks to you about how to destroy skeletons, and he says, "Don't use swords. Use blunt weapons instead, because swords are made for cutting, right? And maces and such are used for like are better for breaking." And I thought about that, but I don't think that's accurate. Um, Surely, if I have a heavy metal bar, whether it's sharp or not, um, it doesn't even have to be heavy, just a metal bar, and I strike a skeleton with it, surely it would still deal massive damage. Now, there are some sorts I totally agree with that wouldn't work on skeletons because they are made for cutting, like a rapier, right? That wouldn't do a lot, even though it would deal piercing damage within that game, but it shouldn't be able to do a lot because you're not, you don't have any weight on your blade. You just poke them, and well, they don't care about getting poked. They much prefer not to get broken. And I think you can do that with a lot of normal swords, because remember, uh, swords are still pieces of metal. Like they they are still, they have still got some weight to them, especially the larger ones, depending on the type. Because again, there are different types of swords, and some bigger swords like the S stock are more for piercing purposes. But even the S stock, I feel like, would stand a chance against a skeleton. It wouldn't be optimal, surely, but you can still damage them, right? Right. Uh, well, here's another thought. It also depends on the condition of these skeletons, their bones. And another thing is, earlier we talked about how they function, but that is probably also important to note in how to destroy them, right? If they do have some sort of core that is placed within them that links these bones together and it keeps it apart, like keeps it together rather, then you must destroy that in order to destroy the skeleton, right? Right. I think that makes sense. Again, kind of depends in the setting, but we already concluded that these skeletons are linked, right? They by something magical, but there's nothing like that should prevent them to be like detach a little bit and reattach. For instance, if like the joints, if you strike the joint, right, with a sword or whatever, and part of it flies off, what is preventing it from just coming right back? Um, I, I can assume that the magic would be strong enough to like reattach it. Um, so again, there's some uh, fancy thoughts that you can play with. What you could also do is have some like more mechanical attachments where there is actually like maybe pieces of flesh keeping the bones together. That might work in some weird necromancy ritual that like reattaches some flesh to keep the bones together. That would remove this magical bit, because otherwise, like, as long as the core is intact, the skeleton will be alive, right? Like, a lot of times they just like in games it just die because you hit them enough, but that doesn't satisfy me. I understand it for gameplay purposes, but that doesn't satisfy me. I do believe that there should be something that just keeps them together until you destroy that something. They will always like reattach. Another good example, that actually no matter what you do, like you kill a skeleton, after a while it comes back together. Dark Souls. I forgot which one. I think it's the second one. Um, Maybe the first one. They're all kind of like all the Dark Souls games kind of blend together in my head. I don't recall until I'm actually playing. But anyway, doesn't matter. What does matter is that they come back together, and that makes sense because it's some magic is making them always reform into their previous being, or at least the skeleton shape of that. So that to me seems like an avenue that is kind of underused in fantasy. And if you do have skeletons in your world, please tell me how they function within it. I'm sure that you can think of some cool stuff. Finally, I would kind of like to touch on how they would fight, like the skeletons themselves, rather than how you would fight against them. Now, there's a lot of advantages to not needing to be attached. If I can detach my own like arm per se, and it's fine, right? Then I wonder if since you're like most of your body parts are floating, you don't care about getting hit, so you can go fairly all out. Um, I I think like reach is less important to you because you can just walk in close, and unless they know how to destroy you, you can just like go in with some high damage dealing weapon, like a dagger, right, to get in there, or an axe. That would like allow you to just get close, not worry about your own safety, right? You can get stabbed, they can chop your head off, doesn't matter. It'll come back. Unless breaking the bones is what kills them, then we can start thinking about like giving them more armor. The another question we need to ask is how much can they carry? Um, I I'd assume that it will be a fair bit. Like it would all depend on the magic, right? The magic involved to that is levitating them, because that's what they're doing. They're levitating. There's no muscle keeping the bones up, so it has to be magic, right? Right. Or maybe mechanical. Maybe there's some. Maybe, see, this is how my brain functions. It's like free flows. Um, Maybe it is like some sort of mechanized resurrection where you have like the bones to be the framework, and then some maybe steampunky like gears and whatnot keeping it together. That could be cool too. That could be pretty cool. But I digress. That's not important. The important bit is, as I was saying, like if your head gets chopped off, that's fine. Like it doesn't need it to see. It doesn't need it to speak. It doesn't need it at all, right? Um, it would just continue on fighting until it flies back to its head, or like I don't even know if it will fall. Maybe it would just like go up a little bit. Can you imagine fighting this thing, right? These skeletons. You just try to whack their head off, and it just like does a little boop. It just flies off a little bit, goes a little higher, and then it goes back down. If it needs to strike you, all it would like, even if it's, oh my god, even if it's out of range, right? It would just detach its arm, float a little closer to do the swing, and then come back. Um, Now that sounds really powerful. So you have to like, this is why you have to think about this, because just resurrecting skeletons can mean so many different things, and there's so much complexity to it, which I think is not utilized enough in your typical fantasy stories. Now, in my fantasy world, I don't have any. Like, resurrecting skeletons is just not possible within my world, within my setting. But maybe within yours it is. And I would honestly like to hear it. As I said before, like, what makes your skeletons function? How would you destroy them? How do they fight? Tell me all about that, because I'm very curious. And we haven't even talked about like abominations, right? And where you have like multiple different skeletons like all linked together. I know that the in World of Warcraft, for instance, another fantasy setting, there are these skeleton like monstrosities that are just a bunch of different skeletons all blended together and then made into one giant enemy. Pretty sure that in the Lich King raid, back in the day, there was I know for a fact that there was an enemy like this that did a bone storm attack. I digress again, but I think it's fine. I think it's fun to just think about this free flow a little bit and interact with you guys. Now, if as I said before, if you have anything, link it down below. If you want to see this live, because I do Fancy Thought live over at twitch.tv/novarious, feel free to stop by, join in. Maybe you can give me a topic to discuss next. Yeah, and other than that, I would like to. You know what? Never mind. I'm gonna go. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye. I could